Hello, this is your Wit and Wisdom lesson for Wednesday, March the 10th. We are on the book. Yes, happy birthday, Caitlin. Everyone say happy birthday, Caitlin. It's her birthday today. She's 10. So we're on the book Separate is Never Equal today for part of the lesson, and then part of the lesson goes back to the last Ruby Bridges book. So today, remember our big question, our essential question for Module 3 has always been, how can people respond to injustice? And then for this section of Module 3, our focusing question, our medium-sized question is, how did the Mendez family respond to injustice? And today's small question, the content framing question, is what's happening in the first half of Separate is Never Equal? And we do have a craft question today, which is our writing question. And it is, why is ending a narrative with a sense of closure important? So we're going to look at all of these things. Our learning goals for today are to examine 3 story elements of the story. Separate is Never Equal. And we're going to look at the settings, the character, and the problem from that text. So before we get started, though, we need to listen to the book because we did not read the book yesterday. Remember, we just looked at, my hair is like trapped in my earring. We just looked at the covers illustrations. We didn't actually get into the book. So we're going to listen to the book today. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, so we are going to listen to it being read aloud. Okay, so here we go.
Dreamscape presents Separate is Never Equal. Sylvia Mendez and her family's fight for desegregation. Written and illustrated by Duncan Tonatiuh. Sylvia had on her black shoes. They were shiny new. Her hair was perfectly parted in 2 long trenzas. It was her first day at the Westminster School. The halls were crowded with students. She was looking for her locker when a young white boy pointed at her and yelled, "Go back to the Mexican school. You don't belong here." For the rest of the day, Sylvia did not speak or introduce herself in her classes. She kept her head down when walking in the halls. When she got home that afternoon, she told her mom, Felicitas, what had happened. "I don't want to go to that school anymore. The kids are mean." "Silvia," said her mother, "¿no sabes que por eso luchamos? Don't you know that is why we fought?" 3 years earlier, in the summer of 1944, Sylvia and her brothers, Jerome and Gonzalo Jr., and their parents had moved from the crowded city of Santa Ana, California, to a farm in nearby Westminster. Her father, Gonzalo Mendez, had labored for years as a field worker, picking grapes and oranges. Now he was leasing a farm. He was going to be the boss. On their new farm, they were going to grow asparagus, chilies, and tomatoes. As the summer came to an end and the first day of school neared, Aunt Soledad drove Sylvia and her brothers and their cousins, Alice and Virginia, to the local public school on 17th Street so they could enroll. Sylvia was going to enter 3rd grade. Gonzalo was going to enter 2nd, and Jerome 1st. "What a handsome building," thought Sylvia as they pulled into the parking lot. Tall trees lined the street in front of the school. There was a playground with monkey bars and a red swing. When they walked into the school, they noticed that the hallways were spacious and clean. "I'm here to enroll the children in school," said Aunt Soledad when they arrived at the principal's office. The secretary gave Aunt Soledad 2 enrollment forms, one for Alice and one for Virginia. But she did not give her enrollment forms for Sylvia and her brothers. "They cannot attend this school," said the secretary. They must go to the Mexican school." "Why do I have to go to the Mexican school?" Sylvia wondered. She was not Mexican. She was American. She spoke perfect English. Her father was from Mexico, but he had become a U.S. citizen. Her mother was from Puerto Rico, which was a U.S. territory. Aunt Soledad was upset. "But we all live in this part of town." Sylvia looked at her cousins. They had light skin and long auburn hair, and their last name was Vidaurri. Their father was Mexican, but of French descent. Then she looked at her brothers, and at her own hands and bare arms. She wondered, is it because we have brown skin and thick black hair, and our last name is Mendez? "Rules are rules," said the secretary. "The Mendez children have to go to the Mexican school." "I will not be enrolling any of them then," said Aunt Soledad, and she stormed out of the office, taking Sylvia and the other children with her. When they arrived home, Aunt Soledad told Sylvia's father what had happened. Mr. Mendez told her not to worry. He had to say he would take care of her. He was a businessman, and he was used to dealing with people. The next day, Mr. Mendez met with Mr. Harris, the superintendent of the Westminster School. Mr. Mendez explained that his family had just moved to a nearby farm. "The public school on 17th Street is the closest school to our house, and my children should attend it." "Your children have to go to the Mexican school," said Mr. Harris. "But why?" asked Mr. Mendez. He was not given an answer other than, "That is how it is done." In the following days, Mr. Mendez met with Mr. Atkinson, the county superintendent, Mr. Harris's superior, and then with the school board, which oversaw all of the schools in Orange County. But they all said the same thing. "Your children have to go to the Mexican school." "But why?" Mr. Mendez kept asking. No one would give him a satisfactory answer. That fall, Sylvia and her brothers had to attend the Hoover School, but known as the Mexican School, on Olive Street in the city of Westminster. The building was a clapboard shack, and the halls were not spacious or clean. A cow pasture surrounded the school. The students had to eat their lunch outside, and flies would land on their food. There was an electric wire that surrounded the pasture to keep the cows in. If you touched it, you received a shock. The school did not have a playground, not even a swing. The Mendez family did not give up. Time and time again, Sylvia heard her father talk with co-workers, friends, and other parents. "It's not fair that our kids have to go to an inferior school," he said. "It's not only the building that's a problem. The teachers at the school don't care about our children's education. They expect them to drop out by the 8th grade. How will our children succeed and become doctors, lawyers, or teachers?" Mr. Mendez created a group called the Parents Association of Mexican American Children. He tried to collect signatures for a petition to integrate schools so that all children, regardless of their skin color or background, could have the same opportunities. But every time he asked someone to sign the petition, he would get the same answer. "No queremos problemas. We don't want any problems." Many of the parents worked on farms owned by white families and feared they would lose their jobs if they supported the petition. One day, a truck driver overheard Mr. Mendez trying to convince a worker to sign his petition. "You know," said the truck driver, "you could file a lawsuit." The truck driver told Mr. Mendez about a lawyer named David Marcus, who had filed a lawsuit on behalf of people in San Bernardino and had helped them integrate the public pools there. At that time, not only were schools segregated, but also other public places as well, such as pools, parks, and movie theaters. Some businesses even had signs that read, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." Mr. Mendez decided right then and there to hire Mr. Marcus, even if it meant having to spend all of his savings to do so. Over the next few months, Mr. Mendez and Mr. Marquez traveled all over Orange County looking for people who had experienced similar problems. Sylvia watched her father leave early in the morning. Sometimes she saw him come home in the evening, but often she only heard his footsteps when he got in late at night. While he was away, Sylvia's mother had to take care of the farm. Mrs. Mendez would get Sylvia and her brothers ready for school, and then she would go out to the fields. She started the irrigation system, drove the tractor, oversaw the workers, and solved any problems that arose. With the help of Mr. Marquez, Mr. Mendez found and talked with other families who were dealing with segregation. One of them was the family. Mr. Estrada had fought in World War II. He had risked his life next to Americans of all races and backgrounds. But when he returned to America from the war, he found out that his children were not allowed to attend school with white children, said Mr. Mendez. It's an injustice. The Estrada family joined the Mendez case, and so did 3 more families. The families were from the different school districts in Orange County: Westminster, where Sylvia lived, Garden Grove, El Modena, and Santa Ana. Mr. Marquez wanted to show that the segregation of students affected not only Sylvia and her brothers, but more than 5,000 children in the system all over Orange County. On March 2nd, 1945, Mr. Marquez went to the courthouse and filed a lawsuit. The trial was held at a courthouse in Los Angeles. Sylvia and her family dressed in their best clothes and sat in the courtroom to listen. The hearing lasted 5 days. Each day, Mr. Marquez called to the stand parents from different districts and the superintendents from each district too. On the first day, Mr. Kent, the superintendent of the Garden Grove district, questioned. He said he sent children to the Mexican school to help them improve their English. That is a lie, thought Sylvia. Her English was as good as the English of any of the children at the Westminster school. Do you give the children tests? Asked Mr. Marquez. Mr. Kent claimed he did. We do so by talking to them. That is another lie, Sylvia wanted to yell. No one had quit her. They rejected her in the Westminster school without asking her a thing. For what other reasons do you send children to the Mexican school? Asked Mr. Marquez. Sylvia and her family braced themselves to hear what Mr. Kent would say next. For their social behavior. They need to learn cleanliness of mind, manner, and dress. They are not learning that at home. They have problems with lice, impetigo, and tuberculosis. They have generally dirty hands, face, neck, and ears. The Mendez family and others in the room stared at Mr. Kent in disbelief. What he was saying was not true. It was degrading. How many of the 292 children at the Mexican school are inferior to whites in personal hygiene? Asked Mr. Marquez. At least 75%. And in their scholastic ability? 75%. In what other respects are they inferior? In their economic outlook, in their clothing, and in their ability to take part in the activities of the school. Do you believe that white students are superior to Mexicans in the respects that you have mentioned? Yes. And is that one of the reasons they are being segregated? Yes. Time and again, Mr. Mendez had asked, why can't my children attend the Westminster school? Now he had his answer. On the second day, Mr. Marquez called to the stand a 14-year-old student from the Mexican school in El Modena. Her name was Carol Torres. She spoke perfect English. It was clear that she had not been sent to the Mexican school because she had problems speaking the language, as the defense lawyers claimed. Mr. and Mrs. Mendez were questioned on the third and fourth day, and so was Mr. Harris, the superintendent of the Westminster school. Sylvia was not called to the stand, but she was ready to testify if they asked her to. She tried looking her best every morning, and she practiced what she would answer. On the fifth and final day of the hearing, Mr. Marcus called to the stand two education specialists to explain why it was bad to segregate children into different schools. Segregation tends to give an aura of inferiority. In order to have the people of the United States understand one another, it is necessary for them to live together, and the public school is the one mechanism where all the children of all the people go, said one of them. The judge nodded his head. He seemed to agree with this. Judge Paul McCormick took almost a year to give his decision, but when he did, he ruled in favor of the Mendez family. In his ruling, he said that public education must be open to all children by unified school association, regardless of lineage. This meant that everyone must be allowed to attend school, no matter what his or her race or background. The Mendez victory made newspaper headlines. Sylvia's family was ecstatic. But they did not have much time to celebrate because the school board appealed the case. That is, it asked for another trial. Sylvia and her family had to go to the state court in San Francisco to argue the case again. In the new trial, the Mendez family received support from the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Japanese American Citizens League, the American Jewish Congress, and other organizations. These groups sent letters with information relevant to the case and asked the judge to rule in favor of the Mendez family. Sylvia was amazed that people of different backgrounds and from different parts of the country who had never met her family were getting involved in the case and trying to help them. But her mother said, "Cuando la causa es justa, los demás te siguen." When you fight for justice, others will follow. On April 15, 1947, the judges in the Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Mendez family again. That June, Governor Earl Warren signed the law that said that all children in California were allowed to go to school together, regardless of race, ethnicity, or language. "So remember," said Sylvia's mother, "we fought to make sure you could attend a good school and have equal opportunities." Sylvia thought long and hard about what her mother said. The next day, she returned to the Westminster School. This time, she did not listen to any whispers. She ignored the children who pointed at her and called her names. Instead, she held her head high. Her parents had fought not only for her and her brothers, but for all their classmates. Looking around, she saw that other children were smiling at her. By the end of the day, she had made a friend. And by the end of the school year, she had made many friends of different backgrounds. She knew that her family had fought for that.
Okay. So that was the story, Separate is Never Equal. And now that we have listened to the whole story, we can start our lesson video today.
Welcome back, powerful thinkers. I'm Sue Sabella, your Great Minds teacher. Let's see what we need for today. Today we'll need Separate is Never Equal, Sylvia Mendez and her family's fight for desegregation. Handout 19A, the narrative comparison. Completed handout 21A, which is the scape chart from day 22, your journal, and a pencil. Please pause here to grab everything that you need and just hit play when you're ready to continue.
We are going to use the book that Miss Sabella shows us, so you don't need the copy of the book. She is going to show us handout 19A, so you do not need a copy of that. And your handout 21A is in your journal. We did that on page... I think page 144 and 145. Okay, so as long as you have your journal, you will have it with you, all right? So, and then you will need a pencil.
A special feature of this text is that some of the sentences are written in both English and Spanish. In order to be able to decide what is happening in this text, we're going to look closely at the sentences as they are, both in English and Spanish. At the beginning of the story, when Sylvia went to a new school, a white boy pointed at her and told her to leave to go back to the Mexican school. That made Sylvia very sad, and when she went home, she told her mom about that. When Sylvia went home to tell her mom what happened at school, her mom replied by talking out loud. There was dialogue going on, and we remember when characters in a story are talking, quotation marks are used to signal to us that someone is speaking. And this book has that special feature where mom responded in Spanish and she also responded in English. Let's take a closer look at those two quotations. I'd like you to listen to the quote in Spanish, and then I'd like you to try it yourself out loud. Ready? Here we go.
¿No sabes que por eso luchamos?
Pause here to give it a try on your own. Also, remember, you're in charge. You can always scroll back on the timeline to listen to the quote as much as you need to as you practice. Just hit play when you're ready to move on to the English quotation.
Okay, so I'm not a good Spanish speaker, but I'm going to get for you again so you can listen carefully, okay? No sabes que por eso luchamos. So I want you to try it. No sabes que por eso luchamos. Okay.
Now I'd like you to listen to the quote in English, and then I'd like you to try saying this quote out loud with expression. Ready? Here we go. Don't you know that is why we fought? Now it's your turn. Pause here to practice reading this quotation out loud with expression. Just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so we're going to practice this one, okay? Remember, you say it with expression. Don't you know that is why we fought? Now you try.
Both quotations can help us understand what is happening in this text. Please pause here to do some powerful thinking or some chatting with a learning partner about how these quotations help you decide or figure out what is happening in this text. Just hit play when you're ready to continue.
So what do you know is happening when you see those quotation marks? We have talked about this before in Wit and Wisdom. When you see the quotation marks, you know what is going on in the story. So when we see quotation marks, that tells me as the reader, someone is speaking. And when there's more than one person speaking, I know that the characters of the story are having a conversation. They're having a dialogue.
Why is ending a narrative with a sense of closure important? Please pause here to grab handout 21A, the scape chart that you filled out for focusing question task 4. Remember, you may not have used the handout. You may have created the scape chart in your journal. And if you did, you'll take this time to find that page in your journal. Just pause here to either grab the handout or to turn to this page in your journal. and just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so we did do this in our journal on page 144 and 145. So turn to these two pages, 144 and 145.
Your escape chart might have looked something like this when Ruby stopped in the crowd. The setting was William Frantz Elementary School, and the characters were Ruby and Mrs. Henry. The problem was that some people did not want Ruby to go to the school. They were mean to her. The action was Ruby stops in the middle of the crowd, and the ending for this exploded moment was Ruby prays for the people who were mean. It's important to note here that the ending of an exploded moment just ends that moment. The ending for an exploded moment is not the ending for the whole narrative. It's just for that one moment in time. And it's directly related to the problem that occurred in this exploded moment. We're going to compare narrative 1 and narrative 2 to the ending on your escape chart. But before we do that, I'd like you to listen to me read aloud both narratives. Ready? Here we go. Narrative number 1. I am going to the Frantz Elementary School. My mom is walking with me. I see many white people yelling at us and holding signs. They do not want me to go to this school. The marshals keep us safe. I am going to walk into the school quickly. I made it inside. Narrative number 2. I am scared to go to Frantz Elementary School. It makes me feel better to walk with my mom. I see many white people yelling at us and holding signs. Why are they being so mean? I don't understand why. They do not want me to go to this school. The marshals keep us safe. That makes me feel better too. I want to cry, but I will be brave. We tried to get in the school quickly. I'd like you to pause here to read the last sentence in each narrative. The last sentence in narrative 1 and the last sentence in narrative 2. As you're pausing, think about this question. How did these exploded moments end? Just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so what is the last sentence in narrative 1? Read that out loud to me, please. Yep, it says, I made it inside. And then let's go down here to narrative 2. And let's read the last sentence in narrative 2. Now that blue bar is going. Okay, it says, we try to get in the school quickly. What happened in both of those sentences? Yeah, she made it inside the school building. Good.
Each of the narratives ended with Ruby getting inside to the school as quickly as she could. I'd like you to check your ending on your escape chart. And as you check your ending, I want you to keep this question in mind. Is your ending like a resolution to the problem in your escape chart? Does your ending provide a solution for Ruby? Pause here to check your ending on your escape chart and just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so let's look at our ending from page 144. We all pretty much had something similar. It said she prayed for the people. Okay, well, the problem was some people didn't want her to go to that school and they were being mean to her. Well, does that ending solve Ruby's problem? Did her praying for those people solve her problem of them not wanting her there? It really didn't, did it? I mean, it might have made her feel better and what she was doing, but it didn't solve the problem. There were still people that did not want her there. So sometimes the ending does not always solve the character's problem.
We learned something new today, and we can add to our narrative writing anchor chart. How do they end? Today we learned that endings answer what happened after the action, and often they describe the resolution or solution to the problem. I'd like you to pause here to stop and do some powerful thinking and also some jotting. Why is ending a narrative with a sense of closure and ending important? Take as much time as you need to think about it, and also feel free to look back at the narrative writing anchor chart and also your own piece of narrative writing. Why is it important to provide a sense of closure at the end? Take as much time as you need to think and jot, and just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so I do want you to pause here and think about that question. Why is it important to end your story? Why is it important to close your story? Why can't you just leave it wide open without having a problem solved? Think about that. Okay, so now in your journal, we are on page 151, and we are going to stop and jot the answer to this question. Why is ending a narrative with a sense of closure important? All right, I'm going to show you my screen. Okay, so why do you think it's important? Why, when you were telling a story, do you have to end the story or close it? So just me thinking out loud, I would think that in order for the reader or the person that you're telling the story to, for them to know that the story is over, you have to have some sort of ending or some sort of closure. And you also need to let the reader know what's going on, that the problem got solved. Do you ever want to hear a story about something that happened and then the person just be like, okay, well, I don't know what happened, and then they just walk away? Or do you want to know, like, if someone's telling you a story about a puppy that got stranded on a frozen lake in the middle, and they're in the lake and the ice is breaking, and they just walk away, do you want them to just walk away, or do you want to know what happened? You want to know what happened to that puppy? Did somebody save it? You want to know. You need to know what happened to it, and you need to know how the story ended. So when you are closing a story, you have to have some sort of closure so that the reader or the listener knows what happened and knows that the story is over. Okay. So on page 151 of your journal today, you're going to stop and jot, and you're going to tell me, why is ending a narrative with a sense of closure important? Okay. All righty, let's get back to our video.
Today, you worked very hard to consider how dialogue, both in Spanish and in English, can help you think about what's happening in a text when characters are talking to each other. Also, you thought a great deal about how endings can help make your narrative even stronger. You worked so hard today, and I hope you're very proud of yourself. I will see you again soon, my friends.
Okay, So that is the end of today's Wit and Wisdom lesson. So that is all that you have for me to do today. Make sure you complete page 151. You're going to take a photo of it and put it into the Google slide that I created for you so that I can see what you said about why ending a narrative with a closure is important. All right. So I hope you guys have a great afternoon. Remember, tomorrow is Thursday. You will have your math benchmark assessment with Ms. Stockwell. So you need to log on either at 8 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon to take that test with her. And if you missed any of the tests on Monday or Tuesday or Thursday, you will need to log in Friday at 1 o'clock to make those up. Okay, you have to get those done before spring break. All righty. So you guys have a great afternoon, and I will see you later, I guess.